Welcome back to another edition of the Osceola Seminole Sidelines as we continue our Florida State 2024 spring football preview. And guys, we're moving to the other side of the ball this week. We covered offense last week. Again, a ton of guys to be replaced on offense and a very similar field to defense. And we're not going to break everything down, but I am going to tell you, Florida State lost 7 of its top 10 tacklers from last year's team. And since we're going to start with the defensive front the first 2 days of our previews, I think it's important to note that Florida State lost 4 of its top 6 pressure guys as far as total quarterback pressures from last year. Now, obviously, they brought some new blood in. But, guys, let's kind of take a look at who left. Now, we're going to just, for the sake of brevity, which we struggle with a lot on this show, we're going to just start with defensive linemen, defensive ends, or tackles that lost to the NFL portal graduation. Obviously, at defensive end, that is Jared Verse, Gilbert Edmond. You can make an argument for Dennis Briggs, who slid in and out, but you got 3 guys there, defensive end that left, and obviously at defensive tackle, which we'll get into tomorrow, Braden Fisk, Malcolm Murray, and Fabian Lovett. But let's talk about who's coming back with the defensive ends, guys. And we're going to start by breaking them down, rush ends versus strong side ends, right? Rush end being a weak side pass rusher takes on the side of the ball without the tight end. And listen, this is just our projection, but certainly it's a different looking room than we saw coming into leaving this past season. But you got Patrick Payton back. You bring in Marvin Jones Jr. You got Byron Turner back, and you got Lamont Green Jr. back at rush end. And then just to look at the strong side, what we are projecting as a strong side, you brought in Sione Lolahi. You got Jaden Jones back. You've got redshirt sophomore Tamiwia Duroje. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I'm going to start calling him TD. Now, we think he will start out at defensive end, and I would think he would play on the same side as Sione and Jaden. And then, of course, Aaron Hester, who's a redshirt sophomore, will be back as well. Just your overall thoughts on how this room looks going into spring, guys.
I think there's a lot of potential there. There might be some position versatility, like you're mentioning there. You know, one guy could be strong side, one guy could be weak side. It does underscore it's really, really good that despite the drama, Patrick Payton is back. I mean, just to have a level of stability, a level of a guy who's been in that room for years and years. I think one of the biggest positive examples of a Mike Norvell, John Papuchis, Adam Fuller development from freshman year all the way up, a guy who has really shown the strength and conditioning gains, and that's huge. I know the coaching staff is really high on some of these newcomers, and yes, we're going to have trouble pronouncing them, but Lolohia, Duroje, just guys who I think have impressed to varying degrees in the offseason workouts. We'll see what that looks like, you know, once they get on the practice field, and then of course once they get the pads on, because that's what we're all kind of looking forward to with these big guys. But there is a standard of what the pass rush should look like at Florida State. It did fall off there, toward the end of the Taggart era into COVID, but it's been building, I think, in a really good direction. Let's see if it does continue to build, not just sacks, again, pressures going to the spring and into the season.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about Patrick Payton. He's one of the elite pass rushers in the ACC, and I think the biggest question for Patrick is not the physical ability entering this season. He is now one of the leaders of this defense, along with DJ Lundy. He is one of the bell cows of this defense. He's one of the guys that people around the country recognize when they hear his name. How important do you guys think that he becomes a bigger leader on this defense this year, and how it impacts the team as a whole?
I think the leadership part is definitely big for a guy who, I mean, is now in year 4. I think there's definitely a world. This is his last year in college football. I mean, he's been pretty productive the last 2 seasons. Seeing him last Thursday at the tour of duty, I thought I'm interested to see what they list his updated weight at. It looked like he might have put on a little more size this offseason. He's never going to be the bulkiest guy. He's the long, lanky type, but the more he can fill out, the more that's going to help him be a well-rounded edge rusher, not a guy who relies purely on the speed. But the stronger he gets, the more he can have that power in his game too. But yeah, I think the leadership part of it's big. I mean, generally where I come down on this group, I can share quickly. I think both these things can be true at once. I'm not sure that they're going to have a true game wrecker like one singular guy you look at like Jared Verse, like they have had the last couple of years with him when he's been out there. But I think I feel better about the two deep as a whole at defensive end entering the spring than I did this last time off season. I mean, we felt great about what they had at starters, but there were some real questions about Gilbert Edmond and Byron Turner, and I think neither of them really ever were ready for being those rotational players that they were kind of thrust into just by the state of the room. So I do feel better about the depth as a whole entering this offseason.
Well, and that is one of the reasons they brought in those 3 transfers, and we're going to talk about the transfers in a minute, but you mentioned Byron Turner, who got an expanded role, obviously in the Orange Bowl. Certainly, I think that he's a guy that's entering his 4th year on campus. He's a guy that's got to make a big leap this spring, in my opinion, if this Florida State defensive end group is going to be deep, at least 5 deep. So what are you guys' thoughts on? He did not have a great Orange Bowl. Of course, nobody did. I mean, let's be honest. That was they were playing with one hand behind their back, and he would not have started, obviously, if things had been different. But just talk about what your expectations are for Byron this spring.
Yeah, I think John Plakuchis wants 5 guys in that rotation. Let's kind of establish that. He wants, obviously, depth plus a 5th guy who can maybe swing and play both spots. So is Byron Turner in that group of 5? It's a really competitive position, and he's going to have to take his game to another level. I think we did see, I think last spring was really good for Byron. We heard some compliments about how he was playing. He was not, for one reason or another, didn't establish himself very early on, needed some strength and conditioning time. Jaden Jones. What does Jaden Jones bring a year after that major injury? I think there's just a lot of competition from maybe that kind of back end of the spot 5, maybe 4 and 5.
Then, go ahead, Curt.
Yeah, I think Byron's a guy who early in his time impressed me when he was healthy, but he missed some time with injuries. I think pretty much missed his entire first season with an injury, and I think missed some time even his sophomore year as well. It kind of feels like, last year kind of felt like he was not, I don't want to say guaranteed a spot in the rotation, but it felt like he had the inner track just because they didn't have a ton of depth there. It feels like he's going to have to earn that this offseason. This is an important offseason for him to show he's worthy of that, because I think Jaden Jones, you mentioned, I'm fascinated year 2 off the ACL. It feels like you always see a jump year 1 to year 2 years removed from an ACL injury, and I'm fascinated how that looks for him this offseason, because physically he looks the part.
Yeah, and then, of course, we finally get to see what we hope is a healthy, full-speed Lamont Green. He's a guy that came in here with a lot of fanfare. Obviously, didn't see him a lot on the practice field in the fall. I think what we learned is that he had an injury, and obviously is a guy that, legacy guy. Dad was a great football player. He was one of those highly talented prospects they signed 2 years ago. I think what's going to be interesting to see, you guys saw him in Tour of Duty. I think the biggest question coming into the spring for me is how much bigger has Lamont got, because we know he's a guy that can run. He's quick off the ball, but he looked a little slight in what limited time we have seen him.
He looked, I would say, just noticeably smaller standing up next to the other defensive ends last year. And he's not a small guy. It's just everybody else is older, has had the strength and conditioning time. And Lamont, I think he had the shoulder injury in that spring game pretty late on, and it maybe seemed to have just followed him through last year. I thought he looked bigger when we saw him in the Tour of Duty workouts. Again, is that 5-10 good pounds? And we'll kind of see how we can build off of that. I think just another guy who's, again, maybe on the outside looking in, but it would be cool to kind of see now that this is almost like his year 1, because last year was maybe a year 0. If you really look at him from his development, what can he show us?
Yep. And I think he's a guy that can help on special teams, kind of what like Byron Turner did, they're built similarly. Byron's been a great special teams player. I think he plays on most of the coverage teams, and maybe some on the return teams. But I think that I'm listen, after all the hype when he signed, I am really looking forward to seeing if he can live up to what we heard about him coming in, and we'll see what happens there. And of course, on the other side, now listen, again, these are projections. We are projecting Patrick Payton and Marvin Jones will line up on the same side of the ball. We'll see if that happens when we get there. This is simply a projected depth chart. But when you look over to the other side, you've lost your man Jared Verse. You've lost the guy that backed him up, Gilbert Edmond. So you've brought in Sione Loelehi, and you've got Jaden Jones coming back. Obviously, you guys have talked a little bit about Jaden. You know, has he been long enough coming off that ACL that we finally truly get to see? We know he's an athletic kid. We know he's a big kid. He's a little bit over 250. But really, I think what we're all looking forward to seeing here is the two transfers, right? You got Sione, and then you got TD, as I will call him, Duroj. I think we're all looking forward to seeing those two guys in the spring.
Yeah, my caution with Tomiwa is he's 19 and he's still really, really young and a little bit on that raw side. But when you're talking about, I like to use the term stash and develop with transfers still. I think the staff likes to stash and develop guys.
Yep.
He may not be a high-end guy year one, but it's going to pay dividends down the road. When you look at Sione, I think the way he moved in some of those agility drills, how much does it exactly translate to the football field? Not perfect, but man, he does move really, really well out there from what we saw in that one day of Turo duty drills. So I'm really curious to see how he can get after the quarterback, how he can get after the ball carrier. I think he's got some pretty good upside because I think he's only got 1 year, right? I mean, this is his this is his all-in year to show it.
Well, and what we know of all the transfers that they took up front, he is the most accomplished, most productive, most experienced. 563 snaps last year, has played, I believe, over 1,200 snaps in his career, and that may be way low. I had that number in my head a while back when we did his evaluation, but that was ninth. He took the ninth most snaps of anybody on defense at Oregon State last year. Produced 46 tackles, 1.5 sacks. He's not getting to the quarterback, but what he does a really good job of is pressuring the quarterback. 33 quarterback pressures, which means quarterback hits, quarterback hurries, sacks. That's a PFF stat. So that's what you're getting out of Sione. And I think I think we've always been kind of conservative in saying, hey, this guy's going to be this or that. We tried to poo-poo, Jared Verse is not going to be near as good as Jermaine Johnson. And then, we kind of undersold Braden. I think we all like Braden from what we saw in practice, but, practicing games are different. So I think Sione is I think out of all the transfers on the defensive line, I think he's the guy that's going to make the biggest impact on FSU's front four.
This year, at least, I think I definitely agree. I think the others long term, but I mean, Sione, I wrote a great story about him a few weeks ago. Talked to the guy who kind of helped him get from Tonga to Hawaii and then California start his journey. But a good interview there. And I think he's a guy. The question with guys like Jared, the question with guys like Braden was kind of like they were impactful at their level. How does it translate? I mean, you look at how the Pac-12 and how good they were last year. He's played some high-level football. He's played some good teams. So that definitely helps in your confidence projecting what he can do. I think when you look at Tomiwa, I remember being pretty blown away talking to him in the interview where he kind of talked pretty candidly about like his belief that he was capable of being a first-round pick, that Florida State was a place that could get him there. And he physically is quite impressive. He's a big dude, especially for a 19-year-old. And I wonder what the role could be year one. And you would hope a guy. I mean, it's school 3 in 3 years, and there are reasons for that, obviously. But you'd hope he can see the vision and doesn't feel the need to be an instant starter if that's not how things work out for him this offseason.
Yeah, and listen, I do believe that he is the guy they brought in to be a backup in either one of the two. I'm talking about two deep. He's played a lot more football than Jaden Jones. He played 270 snaps last year at West Virginia, which is 14th most in their defense. He had 18 tackles, 5 sacks, 14 quarterback pressures. So he's got more experience than anybody else he's going to be competing with, so that will certainly help. And listen, as you said, I saw him this weekend when we were down there for Junior Day, and he is impressive physically. He certainly looks like he carries 280 pounds really, really well. He's not an ounce of fat on him. And he's a guy that if you guys mentioned 19, if he's a guy in a year from now, 2 years from now, we're seeing move inside. I think you could see that but he is a impressive looking athlete. But I do think if you go back and look at what we are projecting the strong side defensive end depth chart to look like, listen, Jaden, as you guys mentioned, did not play up to what we thought we'd see in this past fall. And certainly Aaron Hester has been, a guy that we has not seen the field. So I think that there is a plan for him to come in here and be in the two deep right away, barring something unforeseen or someone makes a huge leap and gets in front of him. But Jaden Jones, again, played 59 snaps last year, so you're getting a lot more experienced player by bringing TD in here than you would if you'd stood pat where you were on the defensive end position.
Yeah, I think Aaron Hester remains a mystery to me to some extent. Just haven't seen enough of him. I think this is a big spring for a lot of guys who are maybe, again, not at the very top of the depth chart. It's more, I think, curiosity. We want to see those guys, but we want to see some of the, let's say, less experienced guys lower on the depth chart. Just what can they bring to the table? Are they in the mix? And candidly, not just at this position, but other positions too. Are these guys looking elsewhere? Are they potentially going to transfer because they don't see the opportunities for playing time just to be as plentiful?
Yeah, and I agree. I think that we're seeing a new era in college football where, if a kid doesn't make an advancement in the spring in relation to how long he's been on campus, if it's time for it, at some point you got to start producing, right? I mean, these guys are getting scholarship money and now getting some NIL money, some of them anyway. But I do, and listen, I think it works both ways, right? The kid may realize, hey, I can't play here and decide to transfer out, or they may have the real conversation that happens at the end of every season, end of every spring. Hey, so-and-so, listen, it's not looking good for you here. This is what we're going to do. But yeah, so I do think there's a couple of guys, Byron Turner, Aaron Hester, and Jaden Jones, that this is a particularly big spring for as far as establishing themselves as having a legitimate future at Florida State. Either as a steady contributor or even a starter. So I think these spring practice battles are interesting that way because, listen, we know we're going to see some kids enter the portal one way or the other. It's going to happen. And so I want to ask you guys this question. Do you guys think there's any way that Florida State jumps in the portal in the spring, post-spring, for another defensive tackle? Defensive end.
I feel like the only way I could really envision that would be if somebody went down with an injury in the spring that was clear they weren't going to be good to go in the fall. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like you're in danger of unsettling the room if you add another after you brought in 3 transfers. That kind of feels like about what you can afford to bring in without upsetting the natives.
All right, so let's talk about one of the additions who we kind of glossed over real quickly, but Marvin Jones Jr. You guys said he looked really impressive in mat drills the other day. It looked like he'd put on some weight since we saw him in December. But obviously, a long kid, long arms, long legs. He kind of didn't play a ton of, he played 237 snaps at Georgia last year, which was 16th most of those on the team. Not necessarily highly productive, 8 total tackles, 1 sack, 5 quarterback pressures. Of course, now they would drop him some in coverage. I'm not sure that's how Florida State intends to use him. But just about, what are your expectations? Or did your expectations for Marvin Jones Jr. grow once you saw him in tour duty drills as far as explosiveness, the way he moves, runs, all those kind of things?
For me, I will say, I think an important part of looking at, he didn't play a ton at Georgia, you're right, but I think the 2 games he played the most snaps in were his last 2 games. You look at the PFF data, it's pretty valuable there. He played, I think, over 30 snaps in the Georgia Tech game and over 30 snaps in the SEC championship game. So felt like that was trending a bit in the right direction. I don't think Georgia wanted to lose him. I think Georgia thought he could be a contributor this offseason, push for either a starting role or a major role. But, it's the exterior expectations are definitely huge for Marvin with the name and with that Florida State badly wanted him and kind of was one of the main runner-up, maybe the main runner-up for him out of high school 2 years ago. Physically, yes, I was impressed with him last Thursday. I think he definitely looked the part. He's a guy who I feel like with what else you have, if him and Pat are rotating, it feels like that could be a slightly more even rotation than Pat had last year with Byron Turner. And I wonder what that could do for both of their production. Kind of, we saw it with the defensive tackles. I thought you saw how strong that room finished the season last year. Felt like a lot of that was because of the factor of the depth they had, that they didn't have to play guys a ton of reps, and that made a difference over the season. I wonder what that could do for Marvin, because I think his ceiling is very high. He's 2 years removed from being a 5-star recruit for a reason.
Yeah. Well, listen, there's certainly you've got a nice blend of proven production at the defensive end position. Payton's a proven commodity. Sione's a proven commodity. Just about everybody else after that's kind of proved themselves either because they haven't played very much or they haven't played at all. So we've got a lot more questions about the defensive front four going into the spring. Certainly did we going into last spring with this group. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see exactly how they progress. But again, Florida State has done what Mike and JP have normally done since they've gotten here. They've gone into the portal to find impact players at defensive end, and they think they've got one. They know they've got a highly productive player in Sione, and then they know that they've got two potentially really good college football players in TD and Marvin Jones Jr. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. And again, some of these other kids could put themselves in the mix, but I think we all have a fairly good idea of who we think the top 5 or 6 defensive ends will be going into spring, and we'd be surprised probably if that changed coming out of spring. So I think spring football is a lot of fun, and this is one of the things that makes it fun is you got all the questions and not a whole lot of answers. And for 3 of these guys, it'll be the first time we've got a chance to see them live and in person in pads. So I think it's going to be fast. Listen, I think every position group outside of maybe quarterback is going to be fascinating to watch because you got new faces just about everywhere, even quarterback. But listen, we're going to come back tomorrow and we're going to talk about the defensive tackles. But we do want to thank you for joining us for our defensive end preview. If you plan to go to Ireland, please reach out. We want to thank our sponsor, Aer Lingus and Anthony Travel. They are going to be helping Florida State fans plan their travel plan so you can go to Seminoles2Ireland.com. Seminoles, the number 2, Ireland.com. And they have travel packages there. Curt just booked his trip. If you're lucky enough to go to Ireland, Curt will buy you a Guinness at one of the local pubs when he sees you.
Jerry Cutts will buy you a Guinness.
Just make sure you have your Osceola subscriber card. And he will do that. But listen, if you don't subscribe to the Osceola, please go to theosceola.com and check us out. We've got a lot of free recruiting content coming off this Junior Day weekend Florida State just had. We've got baseball coverage, basketball coverage. It's a really busy time with all the sports going on. And, of course, if you are not a subscriber to our YouTube page, please hit the subscribe button and the alert button so you know when we do videos like this. And Curt, Bob, I appreciate the time, and I will see you guys again tomorrow.
Your Seminoles kick off the 2024 football season in Dublin, Ireland, as they face the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets in the Aer Lingus College Football Classic. Join fellow Florida State fans on a trip you won't soon forget. Game tickets for the August 24th matchup are now available through Florida State Athletics Ticket Office and selling fast. Visit Seminoles2Ireland.com. That's Seminoles, the number 2, Ireland.com. And go Noles!